slip in a few videos here and there which show your expertise as a mix engineer, you know, how I turned a song from this to this, you know, how I made a vocal shine, you know, that's great. You can pepper those in, but don't make the content that you'd want to see. Make the content that your ideal client would want to see.
You're listening to the Inside the Mix podcast with your host, Mark Matthews.
Hello, folks, and welcome back to the Inside the Mix podcast, or welcome if you are a new listener. Today, I'm joined by a special guest, Eliott Glinn, a talented mixing and mastering engineer based in West London, so a fellow Englishman on the podcast, which actually is going to be the first. Oh no, I tell a lie. We had one before the new year. He's built a thriving remote business, collaborating with artists worldwide to transform their recordings into powerful, emotive mixes they can be proud of. Eliott, thanks for joining me today. How the devil are you?
I'm doing really well, Mark. Thank you so much for having me on, and excited to chat to you today.
Yes. I know we put, as I do with all these episodes and these interviews, I always put these. Schedule these interviews quite far in advance, so it's been a long time coming, probably 3 or 4 months, I would say. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. Some really interesting stuff in this episode, which I'm going to go through in a minute, which is going to help the listeners, the audience, really kick on in 2025. So, a bit about Eliott here. He's a professional mixing and mastering engineer, as I've mentioned, with a passion for both audio excellence and the business strategies behind running a successful music career. Beyond the technical side, Eliott helps other engineers and producers build systems to grow their businesses. And we were chatting about systems just before we started recording, from lead generation and content creation to effective workflow management. And in this episode, Eliott's going to share tips and strategies to help you kickstart your music business in 2025. Or if you're listening to this in the future, whatever year you're in, because, it's always going to be there.
It should always apply.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it will always apply. It's not just specific to 2025. So, Eliott, you've built a successful remote mixing and mastering business for producers and engineers looking to start or grow their side hustle in 2025, or maybe they just want to go straight all in with it altogether. Can you talk about some of the most important mindset shifts they need to make?
Yeah, there's probably 2 main ones that I see all the time when I talk to people about this, and they both revolve around money. The main one is that a lot of people seem to think, and I think this comes from their family or their friends saying it, that there isn't any money in music. You know, it's quite a typical limiting belief people have, which is obviously a lie, because there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people making a living from, you know, directly from music, whether that is writing, recording, mixing, mastering, you know, any kind of avenue you go down, there is money to be made there. And the second one, I think, as well, is people, because it's a hobby, a lot of us start this out as a hobby, and something really enjoy doing on our spare time, that people feel bad charging for their services because they feel like, well, I'll be doing this anyway, it's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of kind of issues around the mindset of charging and pricing your services appropriately. If it is something that you plan on doing, is trying to make this a full-time gig or even just, you know, some side income, really trying to get your mindset around the fact that this is a business, you can make money from it, and you should be charging a fair rate for the service that you provide.
Very good. So you mentioned money in music, and the general misconception that there is no money in music. Have you got an idea of why, like one of the main reasons why maybe someone from the outside looking in would think that way?
Yeah, I mean, there's this prevailing myth of the starving artist, isn't there? And I think that applies for not just music, it applies for any kind of arts like actors and painters. And, you know, there's the myth that you need to struggle for your art and you need to be poor and like work your way up. And it's just really not the case. And obviously, like with any kind of skill and any kind of business, it takes some time to get to a point where you're profitable and you're doing, you know, pulling in the right clients or making the right kind of money. But I think it comes from that lack of it being seen throughout school as a kind of viable career option. Through school, you're always told, you know, kind of do maths, English, science, do something business or accounting or that kind of stuff, you know, and it's very rare that you're pushed in school being like, you can make music or arts your career. And I think that's where it lets a lot of people down. And then that kind of, you know, festers in your brain for all throughout the rest of your life. And a lot of people are probably sat at home thinking, yeah, no, there's no money in music, but I do this full time. I know so many people that do, you know, make full-time income from making music, so it's totally doable.
Yeah, most definitely. It's like, just being a full-time creative is certainly doable. And going back to what you said there about in school and career pathways, and having come from being a teacher myself and working in a school, no longer doing it now. And it's unfortunate because what echoes what you said there is that generally when there is budget cuts or there aren't enough teachers to fulfill positions, which invariably does happen in the UK and probably across the board, the creative subjects are generally the ones that are cut first in favour of, like you said, math, science, English, which I'm not knocking those. Obviously, we need to be a maths and English and science and whatnot. But yeah, generally the creative ones are knocked first. And I remember when I was living in Cardiff and I was in a house share, and this is going back many years now, and I was doing a master's degree in music engineering and production. And I had a housemate, and I was doing my master's degree, and I was talking about how I was working in a primary school, and I was just teaching these kids how to use Reason and produce some Reason. And primary school kids, I realized at that point, trying to teach them how to use Reason, my God, I never wanted to step into a primary school again. Anyway, I remember him said to me, and his exact words were, "Why would they want to learn about music?" And I was just like, "What are you talking about, mate?" And it was very much an outsider's perspective, and that was his exact mentality. It's like they're not going to get anything out of that. Why would they want to learn about it? It's crazy.
Yeah, it's really sad that is the prevailing thought around this stuff, and like you say, it goes all the way to the top, all the way to the in government, the way they set the kind of things that are taught in school. It is this belief that, okay, it's nice, you can do that on the side, it's a bit of fun, and you should obviously be creative and enjoy it, but to make money and have a living, you need to do this other stuff. And I also worked in a school for a number of years as a music technician, and the amount of kids that loved music and got so much joy and enjoyment out of doing it. They used to come in their lunch and breaks and before and after school into the practice rooms to play, and you'd see them come alive. And these were the kind of kids that probably in other academic classes weren't doing so well, but music was like a safe haven. And I know that was a similar thing for me growing up as well. I was dyslexic in school. I struggled with the kind of traditional math, science, English, but music was always, it just clicked. And so being told from a young age that, oh, this is not something you can do, you should do something else, is very damaging, I think. So yeah, it's a myth that I'd really like to bust.
Yeah, most definitely. And like you mentioned there about being in the industry itself, there is money to be made out there. And obviously the industry does change and it pivots and it moves with regards to like the current climate. AI is a big one, for example. Of course. And you got to find out where you can maneuver within that. But you can do it. I mean, it's crazy that people think that you can't. And also the creative economy does contribute millions upon, I don't know the figure.
It's huge,
but millions to the UK and obviously economies abroad as well. So to say that there isn't money in it is crazy. You know?
Yeah, that's it. And I think a big part of it as well is probably the old belief as well about record labels holding all the money and being in charge and stuff. Whereas now, there has never been a better time to be a creator, like you say, whether that is music or video or whatever it is you're doing, because you can garner an audience like that. All it takes is just a little bit of graft and consistency, and you can get an audience where you earn enough money to make a living from, and you don't need outside help from a label or from management or things like that. You can do it yourself, and the skills you can learn to do it as well. So
most definitely,
it's one of those things that I don't think there's been a better time in history to try and make a living from music.
Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation I had probably about a year ago on the podcast with a chap called Jesse Kay from the New Agency, and he put it quite nicely. He said it's now the case of the tail is wagging the dog in terms of the artist having the power now to have more control over their creative intellectual property, essentially, which I thought was great. I love that
couldn't agree more.
Yeah, most definitely. Moving on to our next topic here. So we've got lead generation strategies. So we're thinking about growing our side hustle, or maybe we're going all in with our music business, whatever it may be. A lot of people in the industry struggle with finding consistent work. So can you tell our audience about some lead generation strategies you've used effectively, and how can someone just starting out begin building a client base?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And like with a lot of these things, there's a ton of nuance. But I have tried so many different things over the years to try and generate leads and build this business. But it always has fallen back to just a simple kind of two-pronged approach. And that is content, creating content, and having conversations. So with those two, you can make this business work. So for me, a huge part of it is making content daily on Instagram. They don't have to be huge production videos. They can be simple little 15-second talking head videos. They could be little looping ones that last 5 seconds and you write some caption underneath. But it's just about putting value out there, understanding what your target audience wants and what they're missing, what information you can help, and kind of position yourself as the expert, and putting yourself out there, and then letting the algorithm kind of push that content out to the right people. But it also, that then helps you have these conversations. So people who interact with your content, people who follow you, people who like your stuff, people who, comment on everything, you can start conversations with them. And just have conversations with 5 to 10 people each day if you can. That's the kind of number that I've found works well for me. Any more is just a bit too much to keep on top of. But between 5 and 10, just get those conversations going with people. And it's not about trying to be salesy. You're not trying to jump in a conversation straight away being like, have you got any songs you need mixing? I'll mix them for you. Nobody likes that. It's about building genuine connection, finding out what's going on with them in their music career. Is there something you can help them with outside of mixing? If that's the thing that you want to do, you could be like, send me your work in progress. I can give you production advice. I can give you tips. I can connect you with session players, producers. Just be the guy or girl that helps people, achieve what they want to achieve. And through doing that, you'll generate leads. It just takes a little while. It does take consistency, but if you do those two things, create content and start having conversations with people, you've basically got the recipe for having a successful business.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Go-Giver parable. I don't know if you've ever read that book.
Love that book.
You probably have. Yeah, the Go-Giver parable, which is you just give, you give and give and give, and you help wherever possible. Basically echoing pretty much everything you've just said there, really, when it comes to those conversations. Yeah,
and that's it, because it builds reciprocity. That's the whole point, is you're putting out this content, and I do it daily because, again, it helps you stay top of mind. And there's so many different topics that I could talk about, and that through having conversations with potential clients, I also find out things that I can make content about. You'll see repeat topics come up again and again and again. You're like, okay, that's an idea then I can make for a video, or a kind of how-to tutorial or something like that. And all that does, the more and more you put out, the more people link to your name. Oh, this guy's really helpful. He does this stuff, and he's giving, and he's giving, and he's giving, and he's giving, and he's never asking for anything in return. And so when it comes to the point when somebody's making an EP or an album or a single, whatever it is, and they're like, I need a mix engineer, then hopefully I'm top of mind. And that's the kind of general idea here.
Most definitely. You mentioned there content and conversations being sort of that two-pronged approach. So to devil's advocate, is that wrong word? When you were doing this, is there one approach can you think of, or can you identify that you tried that really didn't sort of resonate or work for you?
Yeah, a big one that I see pushed a lot is to do an email list and do email marketing. And that's something I've tried on and off numerous times, and it's never seemed to work for me. I don't know why that is. I think I was trying, sending weekly emails, sending things about how to write, how to produce, how to mix, just covering a broad range of topics. But it's really hard to grow an email list from social media. You have to put up things like, free lead magnets and things like that. And I only ever built up to like 100, 200 people on this email list, and I never got any work through it. And I think I sent weekly emails for about a year with it. And I just thought, do you know what? It's just realizing this isn't working. I know what is working, which is content on Instagram. So I'm just going to double down on that. I'm just going to give up. I think too many people try so many things at once. So they'll try the email marketing, they'll try Instagram, they'll try YouTube, they'll do TikTok. And it's just spreading yourself thin. And instead just focus on one that works for you. So like for you, this podcast is your thing. It's like, this is what you do. And it works for you. And Instagram works for me. I know a bunch of producer friends who work really well on YouTube. And so they just focus on putting out one really good YouTube video every month. And that brings in enough leads to run their business. Instead of spreading yourself thin, trying a million different things that don't work.
I 100% agree with all that. I did have a question that was going to lead on. You've pretty much got through it there, which was regards to spreading yourself too thin. And I remember when a couple of years ago, and I was trying to be omnipresent on all these platforms, and it is just so tiring. It is so tiring. I was trying to go live on Instagram. I was going live on YouTube and Facebook when I was doing podcast episodes, and I had content that I was posting on each platform, trying to get it out there. And I realized it was really tiring, and also it just wasn't that effective. And then having looked at that and then sort of reevaluated it or reflected on it, I then just narrowed it down to Instagram. I'm still on the other platforms, but cross-posting, if it's automated, then it'll get posted. And having then narrowed my focus, it then resulted in actually the downloads increasing with the podcast. And I found actually I was posting less and the downloads were going up, which was quite interesting. And it's still the case now, which is amazing. And what you mentioned there about YouTube, so for example, the podcast is on YouTube, but I'm still toying with the idea of actually just using the RSS feed and sending it out to YouTube and not having the video format, because it would just save me time and I can concentrate on the audio side of things. But there is this little thing in my head, which is that fear of missing out that is so hard to get rid of, because I know there are people that consume the podcast on YouTube and I don't want to lose them as listeners, as viewers. So a quick question with regards to that FOMO and fear of missing out. Do you have you experienced that, and how do you sort of deal and strategize around that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And it is something I still do think about a lot. Like you say, you feel like, if I'm not on this platform, if I'm not posting here, then I could be missing out on potential listeners, potential customers, whatever it is. But I think the key part is that self-awareness. So you had, and that I've managed to go through as well, which is you try all these other things. You try a bunch of stuff and you just kind of seeing what sticks or what resonates with you, because a huge part about doing content online and creating a business online, you need to be able to do it consistently, and you're not going to do something you don't enjoy or something that burns you out consistently. So it's realizing, look, we are one-man teams, or you might have an assistant or somebody to help you, but really you're kind of a one-man band. If we were like an agency and we have 5 or 10 other people working, then maybe we could be on everything at once, and that would generate more income or whatever it is we're looking for. But as a solo creator or solopreneur, whatever it is, you need to understand that your energy is finite and it can only be put in so many places. So try everything, give it a go, see what works for you. But then once you've kind of done that for a bit, just double down on what works, forget about the rest, and just really, really stick to it. Because you'll see, like yourself, you go, oh, actually, I'm posting less, but my views are going up. How is that possible?
Yes,
it's like, but you're probably making better content, you're doing better interviews, and you'll have far more energy, spending less time doing things that don't move the needle. So yeah, it's kind of a win-win.
Yeah, exactly that. And I do need to, with regards to YouTube, I still want to have that presence on YouTube because I do have good engagement on there. But I know that if I didn't do the video element of it, I could then recoup that time.
Yeah.
And then put that into, as you say, the actual production of the audio side of things, and then the interviews and whatnot, and just everything else that goes with it. So I need to sort of like practice what I preach, really, with regards to that. Yeah. It's a real tough one. It is. It really is. It is tough to do. I think you really do need to do it. And again, this is kind of another sort of tangent I'm going down here. And that is also, I think, can be reflected in terms of a service that you offer. So this isn't in the actual itinerary we've got for this episode, but it's in the back of my mind here. So with regards to services that you provide, obviously we've got mixing and mastering, production for yourself. Would you sort of recommend a similar approach when it comes to providing services as a mixing, mastering, engineer, producer? That FOMO, try not to provide everything and maybe narrow down on a particular avatar, as it were.
100%. And again, it's one of these things that you need to try and you need to test the waters and experiment with, find what you enjoy most. But like a lot of people, I came up doing recording, doing production, trying to do everything. And it was only after years of experimenting and trying different stuff, I realized mixing is for me. It's the thing I love doing the most. It's where my skills and my interests, overlap. So I doubled down on that. And I see people who are successful in music creation, I see them niche down to doing just one thing, whether it be production, whether it be mixing, whether it be mastering. Obviously, there can be overlap. Like I do all three, but my main thing is mixing. And mastering and production are, the kind of peripheral things. But yeah, absolutely. Find the one thing that you enjoy doing the most and just stick to that, because it's like, I've heard this analogy used before, but you wouldn't kind of go to a GP doctor to get heart surgery because they're a general practitioner, they know all of this, a lot of general knowledge about a lot of stuff, but when you want something done right, you go to somebody who does just that. You don't want to put your life in somebody else's hands who's not an expert. And I think positioning yourself as an expert in whatever field it is you choose to do is a real key thing in terms of building a good business, because if you go on someone's Instagram and it says, I do vocal editing, vocal tuning, recording, mixing, mastering, like podcast production, all of that stuff, it's just overwhelming. And somebody's going to look at it and go, are they going to treat my project with the care it needs? Whereas if you go to someone who just does mixing or just does mastering, it's really clear what they do. You're showing yourself as an expert, and it's a lot easier for somebody to kind of pull the trigger.
Clarity, isn't it? What you mentioned there about being clear as to what they do. And in my head again, I'm thinking I've gone on websites before, and much like you said there, you go on there and it's just a shopping list of services that they provide. I'm thinking, well, okay, you're mixing, you're mastering, but then you're also doing podcast editing, and you do podcast production. It's just like, I mean, you may have all the time to be able to do that, but can you really say that you are the expert? Not necessarily the expert, but yeah, I guess, yeah, have that expert position in that particular remit. So yeah, excellent stuff, Eliott. Excellent stuff. So in the interest of time, because I realise we're already at 20 minutes and I've only 2 questions in. This always happens. So we're going to now move on to content creation for visibility. So we've already touched on that a little bit with regards to, you say, you're putting out content and the approach you take. So can you share how you approach content creation and how producers can use it to establish credibility and attract potential clients? I think as part of this as well, because I think it can get quite overwhelming thinking that you have to post every day or you have to post at certain times of the day or what have you, which I think is a misconception. But yeah, maybe you could talk a bit about your establishing credibility and your content creation approach.
Yeah, it's what you mentioned there is crucial, I think, to content creation in general, which is doing it in a way that is sustainable. So yes. For me, I've landed on the cadence of every day. I do miss days here and there, but for the most part, it's every day. It's just something that is built into my schedule, and I'm happy to do it because the way I post content, it usually doesn't take me longer than half an hour, maybe an hour most for the kind of bigger videos that I'll do. But it is key to stick to a schedule that you can stick to. So if that's once a week, make it once a week. If it's 3 times a week, make it 3 times. But don't try and feel like you need to do 5 times a week, 6 times a week, 7 times a week because some social media guru online told you that's what you have to do. It's about doing something that is sustainable for you because, again, as soon as it gets hard, you're going to drop it and you're going to forget about it and you're going to move on. That's step number 1. But also number 2, which is very closely linked to it, is about being authentic in the kind of content you want to create. So don't try and copy other people and the kind of styles of videos they do. You really need to experiment and land on, a way of creating content that's true to you and your own voice, because a huge part of this content is obviously to sell yourself and to make yourself attractive to potential clients. If you're doing stuff that is phony or fake or is see-through, people will see through it. Everyone has a kind of good bullshit detector these days. With content, you can see who's genuine, who's not. So just try and experiment and find stuff that works for you and resonates for kind of your voice, and just keep experimenting and trying different things. That'll be my biggest key takeaway.
I think what you mentioned there about the bullshit detector is quite important, because I've said this and I've had this conversation on the podcast before about how, like, as soon as you start presenting yourself and trying to emulate someone else and it's not you, as you say, people can quite quickly see through that. And I also had this actually when I was releasing music, and I remember when I was producing, I moved away from being in a band and then I was releasing music under my own steam, and I was trying a couple of different genres, and I quickly realized actually, I could put music out, but it wasn't authentically me, and it could be heard in the music as well. I listen back to it now and I'm like, oh shit, man, that's not great.
What was I doing there?
Yeah, it's not great. I have no idea what I was doing. So it also, I think in any creative form, because putting content out, you are a creative. Yeah, it's a creative. And also, I was going to say this earlier, and I totally forgot actually, but actually just the art of being an entrepreneur and being in business for yourself is creative as well. There's so many creative facets to it. But yeah, that authenticity one, I think is key, man, because like you say, people can quickly see through that. Yeah,
definitely. It's an obvious thing you see online, and you have to kind of go through and test the waters, try things out, and part of that will be trying to emulate people you admire online. But as soon as you can kind of land in your groove and find things that work for you, that you feel good doing it. So again, I've got a lot of producer friends who don't like talking to camera. They feel a bit just uncomfortable talking directly to camera. So instead, they'll make breakdown videos of their productions and show you, go through each individual element and build up the track in a minute long, half a minute long kind of reel. Whereas other people really love talking to camera and are great communicators, so they can turn the camera on, sit there and talk and condense an idea down really easily. So it's just finding things that work for you. But another key part of it as well, I think I mentioned it earlier on, is knowing what your ideal audience is going to want to see. So I think a big trap that a lot of first-time mix engineers, producers, mastering engineers fall into is making content for other mix engineers, for example. So a lot of mix engineers think, okay, I'll just make content showing how good I am as a mixer, and that will attract artists. And it doesn't. All it does is attract other mix engineers who are like, oh, that's cool, I like that trick, that's a good trick, Whereas you're trying to attract artists. What problems do artists have? They have problems with writing, with production, with recording, with getting gigs, with motivation, with mental health, all that kind of stuff. If you can create content around those things, slip in a few videos here and there which show your expertise as a mix engineer, how I turned a song from this to this, how I made the vocal shine, that's great. You can pepper those in, but don't make the content that you'd want to see. Make the content that your ideal client would want to see.
Yeah, that's a top tip right there, which I've now marked. So it's going to be a soundbite for this episode. A fantastic tip there in terms of that content and what you should be showcasing, because I've noticed that when I've done particular videos in the past, and then you realise actually the only engagement I'm getting from this podcast episode, or notably YouTube really, is just other engineers commenting on it, either saying, no, that's wrong.
Yeah,
which does happen.
Always, yeah. No, you're doing it wrong. Don't do it like that.
Yeah, you're like, no, that's not the way to do it, or something along those lines. I'm like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Then I realised that's not landed where it should have landed, But
yeah, and it's easy. It's an easy trap to fall into, because it's something you're confident talking about. As a mix engineer, I could talk about mixing for hours because it's something I love and I'm really passionate about. But that's not the audience. Like I say, the artists aren't caring how I EQ a kick drum or how I use 3 different compressors to get this. Like, they don't care. They just care what comes out of the speakers. Will it connect with my audience? Like, if you can show that in a good way, then you kind of win them over. But yeah, it is a trap I see people fall into all the time.
Wise words, my friend. Wise words. In the interest of time, we'll move on to this final question I've got here. So imagine we've gone through this process, content creation. We've got the leads coming in. We're having these conversations, and now we're at that point now where we're going to be charging for our services, or maybe we've completed a project or completed our first project. So we're talking about long-term success and client or customer, however you want to phrase it, retention. So can you tell our audience a bit about strategies that you use to build long-term relationships with your clients and, importantly, keep them coming back?
Yeah, that's a great question. In this game, as with most things, reputation is everything. So you need to obviously do great work, and you need to also keep your word. So do what you say you'll do by when you say you'll do it, because that's the worst thing you can do is tell somebody, I'll give you the mix on Friday, have a Friday rolls around and they don't get an email from you or any communication, and then you send it on the following Wednesday. That's a recipe for disaster. So just be the consummate professional that you should be if you're trying to turn this into a business. So clear communication with everybody, stay on top of all of your emails and DMs as much as you can. And like I say, if you promise something, make sure you get it in on time, if not beforehand. And, it's that whole under promise, over deliver is key for this. And I think as long as you can kind of bake that in to how you operate and how you do business, then you're going to keep as many clients as possible. Obviously, people do fall off and you end up not working with some people again because you might not have been the right fit or they want to try someone new. But for the most part, if you just do good work and be a good, as they say in America, be a good hang, then people are going to want to come back and work with you again.
Yeah, it's that idea, isn't it? Of like, you want to be someone that people want to have in the studio. I appreciate like we provide and we have these remote services that we provide, but in theory, you want to be thinking, okay, yeah, that guy's great. I'd like to have him in the studio. Or girl, I'd like to have them in the studio with me while I'm working, proverbial studio, as it were. So just on the flip side of that, can you identify maybe something that would not work in your benefit, or what you might see people doing where they fall foul of sort of this client retention and long-term success?
Yeah, I think maybe being overly, I wouldn't say overly needy, that might be the wrong phrase, but when it comes to music making, it's a very personal thing. And like I said, sometimes you work with somebody and you think you have a really good relationship and you've had an awesome project, and then they might work with someone else. And sometimes I see people burn bridges because they feel, their ego gets in the way and they're like, why didn't they come back to me? They should have come back to me. Or maybe you're working with someone, it's not going quite well enough and they want to try someone new. I've had it where people have come to me and they're trying to get me to mix it when they've had a bad experience with someone else. And there's other mix engineers not sending the files over, or they're not giving them, which is their intellectual property. So it is that kind of immature approach to it, where it's like, also the scarcity mindset, where it's like, I need to keep everything in and not let anybody go. It's a free world. Anyone can work with anyone, and just being okay with it and letting that go is going to stand you in good stead. Again, you just come off a lot better if you're a lot more relaxed and calm about this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, I've heard horror stories about bad producers or mix engineers people have had really poor times working with, and it's ended in a kind of burnt bridge, which is not what you want.
Yeah, ultimately, I think I remember hearing this from a CEO of quite a large organization, and they just summarize it as pretty much as "don't be a dick."
Yeah,
basically,
that's it.
You could summarize it in that way. It's just like, you got to think, right? Someone's come to you for a service because they want to have whatever it is that you provide, and like ultimately, it's their project, and you should be looking out for their project and making sure they get the best possible outcome from it. Whether that's with you or actually you realize this isn't quite working out, I'll recant from this. You can take this to someone else where maybe they'll be able to do something better for you, and just not being salty about it, and just realizing it's for the better of their project. And in doing that, you're not going to burn those bridges. But I know what you mean. I've witnessed that, and I've seen that myself.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because it puts a bad mark against your name then. Like I say,
yeah,
is everything, and you want to be known, whether you work with this person or not, as the kind of guy that they can come to and send things to, or you just need to be that professional that again, you wouldn't imagine CEOs or managers of businesses kicking people out and like unwarrantedly, and just you want to be the professional that you should be. And I think that's the kind of main thing, and just keeping on top of communication as well. So once you've had a project with somebody and you've parted ways, follow up with them every 3, 6, 12 months, whatever it is, and just check in, see how they're doing. Again, not to be like, are you ready to send me another song? Just going, how's the music going? How's the family? Just build relationships with people, and that'll stand you in real good stead in this industry.
One quick question off the back of kind of segueing a little from what you said there, just before we move on to the final part here. Cold calling of potential clients. I know this isn't to do with, I suppose it is to do with long-term success, because I've had this where I've released music and then I've had DMs or an email, and then someone says, oh, listen to the XYZ song. And there was one in particular where someone was like, it sounds really harsh in the mid-range at about 1K. I think you need to do this, this, and this. Help you. And I'm like what? That may be so. It wasn't. But like, what are you doing, man? Like, that is not the way to approach it. What are your thoughts on that?
That is quite literally the worst way to approach it. Again, they're trying to position themselves as the expert and making it about them, being like, this is what I can do, this is what I can do. And it shouldn't be about that. It should be about the artist and about what they can get from it. But yeah, I get, it doesn't happen as much anymore, thankfully, but there was for a good 2-3 years, I would get random DMs being like, hey bro, let's collab. People just trying to get something from you and not offering anything in return. And going back to what you mentioned about the Go Giver, which everyone should read. Yes. It's about giving as much as you can, and then you will receive in return. It might not be from that person, it might be from the next one, but just if you're going to cold DM people or cold email, again, you don't go for the kill straight away. It should be building up a relationship, get to know them. You might assume they have a problem, like that person assumed you had a problem with 1K, which you didn't. But if he had spoken to you, he might have understood that you mix it that way because you like that sound, and so he's just come in trying to sell you something that you didn't need, and he just comes off as a jerk. So you cannot accurately prescribe a solution to a problem that you don't know. So that's why talking in DMs with people is so key. You need to understand, do they have the problem that I believe I can solve for them? If they don't, then that's fine. You can keep chatting or you can move on, but you can't go in for the hard sell because it just leaves you up shit's creek.
It does. Like yourself, I don't really get them anymore, but I remember it's notably really whenever I release music of my own, and then sort of these people sort of crawl out the word work, as it were, offering XYZ service. A lot of mastering engineers do that, I find.
That's a shame as well, because mastering out of all of it is one of the most like relationship based kind of businesses as well. So for people to kind of jump in straight away and be like, I can master your stuff for you. Race to the bottom, I'm like 20 quid for a master. It's just like, I wouldn't trust you. You haven't even bothered to kind of have a chat with me and figure out what kind of music I make. If I'm looking for a mastering engineer, they just go for the hard sell, and they're shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, that race to the bottom one, I could probably do a whole episode on that. Some of the race to the bottom stories I've experienced, and you've probably experienced yourself as well. It's crazy. Yeah,
it's sad, and I think it's unfortunate that there's websites like Fiverr and Sound Better and Air Gigs. They're great if you're just starting out and you want to kind of get your feet wet and get projects and stuff, but all anybody is looking for is the cheapest option on those websites, which is why I'm not on them. I think I set a profile years ago on Sound Better, and a similar thing with Air Gigs, but I never get any work through them, and I don't really want to, because I want to have a relationship with all of my clients. I want to get to know them. I want to jump on phone calls with them and talk through stuff. And I want to provide a service that they're happy paying more of a premium for. And you're not going to get that through websites like Fiverr or Sound Better. It's going to be send the files, receive them back, and that's it. No communication, no care given. It's just like an exchange, which is not really how art should be made.
I totally agree. There needs to be that collaborative process and that communication, conversation to, I think most importantly, going back to what you said right at the beginning of that with regards to the cold DMs, is establishing whether or not you're a good fit. Just reaching out to someone and saying, I'll do X, Y, Z for you. How do you know it's going to be a good fit without having that conversation? That kind of segues nicely onto this final bit. So I'll be doing you a disservice, Eliott, if I didn't offer you the opportunity, or give you the opportunity rather, to just describe a little bit about what you're doing and what you provide, where the audience could find you, and maybe if you've got some exciting thing or something coming up, maybe you could reveal to the audience. If not, just like what you're doing, where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place would be on Instagram. My handle is Eliott Glinn Audio. Eliott is spelled Eliott, Glinn, Glinn. It's a bit of a weird spelling, but yeah, Eliott Glinn Audio. Same thing for my website. But on there as well, I'm just setting up now. I'm in the process of creating a community for people who want to learn how to mix as well, because a big part of my journey as a mix engineer coming up was being in this community where we got sent multi-tracks every month. We were shown how the mixer walked through the mix and did all of his tweaks, and then there was a monthly Q&As. So I'm in the process of getting something similar set up. So if anyone's interested about joining that, then go to the link in my bio on my Instagram. There's a button in there. It's called Learn to Mix, and you can join the wait list. But yeah, I'd love to connect with anybody. If they want to talk business, want to talk mixing, anything like that, just drop me a DM on Instagram and I'll be happy to chat.
Fantastic stuff. I will put a link to the Instagram and also your website in the episode description. So audience, please do go and check out Eliott's Instagram and the website as well. And if you're interested in content creation, do go check out, obviously, Instagram, because that's where you're going to find it, because there's some great stuff on there. Some really good B-roll content.
Yeah.
Got to say that. Some really good stuff in there.
Appreciate it.
Eliott, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today with regards to all things sort of business in the music industry and whatnot. So hopefully this is going to set the audience up if they're thinking about kicking on with their own services in 2025 or whatever year they're listening to this. And then, they're going to get a lot out of this. So a big thank you for joining me on this today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Mark. Appreciate it.
No worries. Cheers, buddy. I'll catch up with you soon.
Cheers. Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, I want to hear from you. Click the link in the episode description. Click the SpeakPipe link and leave me a 30-second audio message. It doesn't have to be 30 seconds, but up to, detailing why you enjoyed this episode and why you would recommend it. And also give yourself a shout out. And as an added bonus, each month I will draw a lucky winner from a virtual hat to win a coffee voucher on me. And if you don't like coffee, just give it to someone else and pretend you gave it to them. So click the link in the episode description, and I cannot wait to hear your episode recommendations.